Flying a glider in World War II wasn't just risky, it was almost a guaranteed brush with death. These pilots took off without engines, carried troops and equipment into enemy territory, and had to land in open fields, forests, or wherever fate dropped them. No second chances, no way to turn back, and no protection once they hit the ground. Yet they kept going, mission after mission, shaping some of the war's most important operations. So what made the job of a World War II glider pilot the most dangerous role in the sky, and why did they still do it? The glider pilot regiment didn't begin with a grand vision. It began with panic. In 1940, Europe watched in disbelief as German forces pulled off something no one thought possible: silent airborne assaults that cracked open critical positions before defenders even realized what hit them. The glider attack on Fort Eben Emael wasn't just a tactical success, it was a warning. Germany had mastered a new style of warfare, and the Allies suddenly understood they were years behind. If they didn't respond fast, they would keep getting surprised from the sky. That shock jolted British leadership into action. The turning point came when the War Office was ordered to explore the creation of a 5,000-man airborne force. What started as a memo quickly became a national priority. On 21 June 1941, the Central Landing Establishment was set up, tasked with two missions: to train parachute troops and to figure out whether gliders could be turned into battlefield tools. This second mission would quietly spark one of the most ambitious aviation projects of the war. To build the glider arm from nothing, squadron leader and Major J.F. Rock was told to find pilots, any pilots. They combed through every branch of the military looking for men who had flown gliders before the war, or who were simply brave enough to try. Their new recruits weren't just learning how to fly, they were training for a job no one had done before, where a single mistake meant certain death. The early months were chaotic. The team was handed outdated bombers and a handful of light training aircraft, like the And, to use as makeshift tugs. Actual combat gliders didn't exist yet, so designers raced to produce models like the one. Until those were ready, training was improvised. Crews removed the propellers from planes to mimic glider flight, and the unit borrowed civilian gliders from across Britain, including a few German-made ones. But the real battle during formation wasn't against the enemy, it was against physics. Hemp tow ropes snapped mid-air, causing frequent crashes. Only the arrival of nylon ropes from the factory finally gave the program enough reliability to progress. By late 1941, the experiments, crashes, and frantic innovation came together. The glider pilot regiment was officially formed as an elite force, trained not just to fly their aircraft into combat, but to fight on the ground after landing. Born out of urgency and built from scratch, it would soon become one of the most daring units of the war. Once the glider pilot regiment proved that gliders could work, the next challenge was far harder: turning this fragile experiment into a force capable of surviving the real thing. The men who stepped forward weren't reassured by the success of the early trials. If anything, they understood the stakes even better. They knew what the Germans had pulled off at Eben Emael, and they knew what would be expected of them if they were ever launched in the same way. This wasn't just flying. This was stepping into a job where the mission profile looked more like a controlled sacrifice. What came next felt less like building an aviation program and more like forging a cult of extremes. The glider pilots weren't chosen for their polish. They were chosen because they didn't flinch. They were expected to master a machine with no engine, no armor, no parachute, and no margin for error, and then climb out of the wreckage and fight as infantry. The regiment had already established that glider crews needed to be tough. Now the new American and Allied glider wings pushed that toughness to a new level. Facilities were thrown together almost overnight. Training airfields were muddy, overcrowded, and constantly under construction. If the British struggled with tow rope failures and improvised gear, the Americans doubled it. Their gliders were mass-produced by companies that normally made pianos, ladders, and furniture, and the pilots knew it. Instructors joked that the aircraft didn't take off. They agreed to try. It wasn't exactly confidence-inspiring, but it created a culture where fear became something you acknowledged, then ignored. By the time the first classes advanced, the regiment's identity was solidifying into something very different from traditional air units. Fighter pilots boasted about speed. Bomber crews relied on altitude and formation. These pilots built their pride on the fact that nothing protected them. They weren't just willing to fly into danger, they were trained to hit the ground inside it. It was during this period that the nickname Suicide Squadron began spreading informally among infantry, paratroopers, and even towplane crews. The name wasn't official, but it stuck because everyone understood what these pilots were being molded for. Landings in pitch-dark fields, under small arms fire, skidding through obstacles, smashing through hedgerows, and somehow stepping out ready to fight with the troops they delivered. As training intensified, so did the expectations. The regiment pushed pilots to land in tighter spaces, carry heavier loads, and operate under simulated enemy fire. Crash injuries were common. Hospital stays were normal. A successful landing was defined in the simplest possible terms. If the pilots could crawl out and assemble their men, it counted. And yet, this relentless pressure didn't break the pilots. It bonded them. They developed a sense of pride that bordered on defiance. They laughed at their odds, named their gliders like boxers' fists, and trained with a kind of fatalistic optimism that outsiders couldn't understand. They weren't preparing for ordinary missions. They were preparing to enter war silently, violently, and almost hopelessly, and to succeed anyway. By the time the Suicide Squadron was fully formed, they were no longer experimenters or trainees. They were a brotherhood built on the idea that some jobs are so dangerous, so insane, that only a rare kind of volunteer will ever say yes. If training made the glider pilots tough, combat revealed just how unforgiving their job truly was. Once they were hooked to a tow plane and lifted into the sky, every mission became a one-way contract with fate. They had no engines to save them, no parachutes to escape with, and no option to turn around. When the rope was cut, whether by choice or by flak, they were committed, gliding silently into some of the most heavily defended battlefields of the entire war. Their first major test came in Sicily in 1943, and it was a disaster that set the tone for everything that followed. Release altitudes were too high, winds were brutal, and the pilots were thrown miles off target. Dozens landed in the sea and drowned before rescue boats could reach them. Others smashed into cliffs and rocky valleys. The men inside, infantry, medics, and engineers, often never got the chance to fight. It was the first real taste of how quickly a glider mission could turn into a mass casualty event. Normandy wasn't much kinder. The pilots arriving on D-Day faced blinding darkness, flooded marshes, and German flak that lit up the sky like a furnace. Surprise was impossible. The Germans had learned from earlier airborne operations, and they were waiting. Gliders came in low, skimming over hedgerows and machine gun nests, crashing through trees and stone walls. Some broke apart instantly, killing everyone on board. Others managed to skid to a stop, only for the pilots to be shot at the moment they stepped out of the shattered cockpit. And yet, the ones who survived often turned the tide in their landing zones, securing bridges, clearing roads, and linking up with scattered paratroopers. Southern France during Operation Dragoon offered clearer skies, but no less danger. Pilots had to thread their gliders through narrow valleys, dodging flak bursts and telephone wires, while German forces scrambled to respond. Market Garden was even deadlier. The Dutch landscape looked peaceful from above, but below it was a kill zone. Pilots landed under direct fire. Entire units wiped out before they even unbuckled their harnesses. Some gliders crashed in open fields covered by German tanks. Others were torn apart mid-air. Survivors often found themselves alone, or with only a handful of men, fighting desperately until they linked up with someone, anyone, wearing the same uniform. Bastogne was a disaster layered on top of winter misery. Pilots flew in through blizzards, trying to land supplies and reinforcements for the surrounded 101st Airborne. Many never made it. Varsity, the last large-scale Allied airborne operation, was more organized but brutally violent. The Germans unleashed everything they had: cannons, machine guns, even rocket launchers at the incoming formations. Gliders burned in the air, others spiraled down, with wings shot off. One of the rawest first-hand accounts came from glider pilot Zane Graves. He described cutting loose over enemy territory with flak bursting around him like angry fists. His glider hit the trees, shattered, and threw men across the forest floor. When he crawled out, he found half his load dead or dying, and German troops already closing in. Graves survived only by sprinting into the woods and linking up with scattered paratroopers hours later. Even after surviving landings like this, the pilots were far from safe. They had no extraction plan, no vehicles, no backup. After completing their mission, they often fought alongside infantry until the front moved forward, then walked or hitchhiked their way back to base. Some took days, some took weeks, a few never returned at all. Glider pilots didn't just fly into combat, they crashed into it, survived it, and fought their way out of it on foot. It was a job with no glamour, no exit strategy, and almost no odds. And that's what made them legends. While Zane Graves and his men braved bullets and flak in powered aircraft, another group of pilots faced an even more precarious fate: the glider crews of World War II. Often called the bastards of the Army Air Corps, American glider pilots flew engineless aircraft, like the Waco CG-4, into tiny, unprepared fields behind enemy lines, frequently under fire, with no parachutes to rely on. Their mission was brutally simple: deliver troops, artillery, jeeps, and supplies with pinpoint precision, then immediately fight alongside them once on the ground. Training was hasty and intense. The U.S. began experimenting with glider operations in 1941, and within a year, thousands of pilots were being trained, often before the military had even received its first gliders. Quality issues meant half of the early Wacos were grounded, yet the pilots pressed on, learning to navigate treacherous landings, avoid obstacles like Rommel's asparagus, and survive the chaos of the battlefield. From Normandy to Market Garden, and even in the jungles of Burma, these men were the first to arrive, and often the last to leave, hauling everything from soldiers to bulldozers, and yes, even mules, into enemy territory. The CG-4A's thin skin and wooden frame offered almost no protection, making every descent a one-way gamble. Yet, in an era before helicopters, gliders were America's stealthy solution to delivering men and machines precisely where they were needed most. American glider pilots were more than aviators. They were infantrymen from the moment their wheels touched the dirt. Their courage and adaptability turned fragile gliders into decisive instruments of war, earning them a place among the most remarkable, if unsung, heroes of the Second World War. Glider pilots risked everything, flying unarmed planes into enemy territory to deliver troops and supplies, then joining the fight on the ground. Their courage made them among World War II's most daring, yet often forgotten, heroes. If you want to uncover more incredible stories like this, subscribe now and never miss a tale of bravery from history.